Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. If there's one idea that stands out in the integral philosophy of Sri Aurobindo, it is the supramental consciousness. Supramental consciousness is expected to change the very character of the world which has been considered so far to be a place of sorrow, misery, and suffering, would no longer remain so. That the world is a place full of sorrow and suffering is something that we have taken as a given, but just because it has been so for thousands of years does not mean that it will always be so. And how will it change? Essentially, it boils down to human nature. And human nature depends upon the awareness that we have, or loosely speaking, the knowledge that we have. The average person's awareness is based on very limited knowledge, and this gives rise to the human nature, which is characterized by number one, a sense of division, that I am very distinct from everybody else. I am a distinct individual with my own needs, desires, and aspirations, and that my opinions are better than somebody else's. So, this sense of division, which creates a barrier between me versus all the rest, is one of the characteristics of this knowledge, this limited knowledge, leading to this type of a feeling, this type of an awareness that it is basically me versus all the rest. The second important thing which results from this limited and partial knowledge is a sense of scarcity, that I do not have enough, I should have more. And this sense of scarcity gives rise to wanting to possess more, a sort of greed. The third important byproduct of this limited awareness is a sense of incapacity, that I cannot do this, I cannot do that, and therefore I may not be able to fulfill the desires that I have because of this sense of scarcity. But we know from the deeper truths of existence that the sense of division, the sense of scarcity, as well as the sense of incapacity are only partial truths, and that at a deeper level, we are all one, and that we have abundance rather than scarcity, and that we have hidden within us that power that is capable of doing everything, and therefore this sense of incapacity is also illusory. The fact is that a few select individuals during all periods of history, at every place in the world, across traditions, have been able to gain access to that level of consciousness, to that level of knowledge with a capital K, which has given them this sense of oneness rather than division, a sense of abundance rather than scarcity, and a sense of infinite capacity rather than incapacity. But these individuals have been only a few and far between. What Sri Aurobindo has visualized is that in the very near future, this will become much more commonplace. And the result will be that the human nature itself would change in very large numbers. So there are two important things to the world becoming a place free of sorrow, misery, and suffering. One is a wider awareness, which will give us a sense of oneness, abundance, and great, tremendous capacity to do things. That is so called, what we may say, self exceeding. And secondly, this will happen to very large numbers so that the typical human nature itself will change. And the result would be, in sort of very simple terms, a shift from an ego driven personality towards a love driven personality, because ego is a dividing principle and love is a uniting principle. And that makes all the difference. Now, here's a small passage from Sri Aurobindo that describes the process by which this type of a radical change in human nature can come about. A divine life upon earth, the ideal we have placed before us, can only come about by a spiritual change of our being and a radical and fundamental change, an evolution or revolution of our nature. The embodied being upon earth would have to rise out of the domination over it of its veils of mind, life, and body into the full consciousness and possession of its spiritual reality. And its nature also would have to be lifted out of the consciousness and power of consciousness proper to a mental, vital, and physical being into the greater consciousness and greater power of being and the larger and freer life of the spirit. It would not lose these former veils, but they would no longer be veils or imperfect expressions, but true manifestations. They would be changed into states of light, powers of spiritual life, vehicles of a spiritual existence. But this again could not be if mind, life, and body were not taken up and transformed by a state of being and a force of being superior to them, a power of supermind as much above our incomplete mental nature as that is above the nature of animal life and animated matter as it is immeasurably above the mere material nature. Let's go over it slowly. A divine life upon earth, the ideal we have placed before us, can only come about by a spiritual change of our being and a radical and fundamental change. A divine life, that is a life radically different from the life that we are accustomed to on earth, which is neither here nor there. That is, it's half animal and half divine. A radical change as compared to this life is something that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have placed before us as an ideal. Not just as an ideal, but an ideal that is sure to be realized in not too distant a future. But then how can that ideal be realized? It can only come about by a spiritual change, by a type of change. Change, of course, is inevitable. If something has to be different from the way it is now, it will definitely involve a change. But in what type of a change? A spiritual change. That is a change that is rooted in our spiritual being, in our divine essence, in our deepest self, or the soul. That is where it will be rooted. So, this type of a change, which will give us the divine life upon earth, can only come about by a spiritual change of our being and a radical and fundamental change, an evolution or revolution of our nature. And what can that change be called? A change in human nature. In our nature, that's human nature. And since it will be so different from the type of human nature that we consider to be normal or typical of human beings, so different it will be that it can be called a revolution of our nature. But then the process behind that revolution, the process that will bring about that revolution, will be an evolution. And evolution of what? Evolution of consciousness. The embodied being upon earth would have to rise out of the domination over it of its veils of mind, life, and body into the full consciousness and possession of its spiritual reality. So the change will be coming out of something into something else. The embodied being, that is the soul, which is has been embodied, and of course, apart from having the body, also has a mind, and the body and the mind are animated by the life force. So the embodied being upon earth would have to rise out of the domination over it of its veils of mind, life, and body. At the present level of consciousness, at the present level of average human consciousness, the embodied being of a human being is dominated by the veils of mind, life, and body, which means basically we cater to the needs of the body, the life with which are closely associated our feelings, and the mind, that is the intellect, but then intellect not necessarily of its highest possibilities, rather rudimentary and crude type of a mental being. So these are a sort of veils. What do they cover? What do these veils cover? They cover that luminosity, that light, which is there in our divine essence. And it is because of this screen, it is because of this curtain that separates the mind, life, and body, the surface instruments which we have for action in the world, from our deepest self, from our divine essence. It is because of these veils that we are unable to express fully our potential, which is possible if we let these tools, the mind, life, and body, get illumined by the soul. And if that has to happen, then the domination of these veils, from the domination of these veils, we have to rise out of it into what? Into the full consciousness and possession of its spiritual reality. It's refers to the embodied being. So the embodied being does have a spiritual reality, but that remains behind the scene. It remains rather dormant. We have to wake into it. We have to rise out of a very partial, limited, and imperfect manifestation of our spiritual reality through the mind, life, and body into the full consciousness and possession of that spiritual reality. And the same thing should happen also to our nature. That is the way we behave. And its nature means the nature of the embodied being, what we call human nature, also would have to be lifted out of the consciousness and power of consciousness proper to a mental, vital, and physical being into the greater consciousness and greater power of being and the larger and freer life of the spirit. Person has to rise out of the domination of the mind, life, and body into the full consciousness. The human nature also has to be lifted out of what is characteristic or proper to a mental, vital, and physical being. Because what is proper to the physical being is to seek physical comforts. What is normal or proper to the vital is to seek uh, satisfaction of the basic emotions, that is to get tempted to pursue what feels good right here and now. And what is the characteristic power and so-called proper expression of the mental? Ordinarily, the proper expression of the mental is to calculate in terms of risk and benefit, gain and loss, and then try to make the type of choices that involve maximum gain and minimum risk. So that is the type of analysis which is considered the uh, nature that is proper to the mental. But then as the person becomes more aware, as the consciousness grows, the human nature will also change, or at least should change. And therefore, it has been emphasized the nature also would have to be lifted out of the consciousness and power of consciousness proper to a mental, vital, and physical being. Into what? Lifted out of this so called proper uh, way of the mental, vital, and the physical to behave, out of this into the greater consciousness, that is a greater awareness. And with this greater awareness would go the greater feeling of oneness and less of the feelings of scarcity and incapacity. So, into the greater consciousness and greater power of being and the larger and freer life of the spirit. Not only that life would be more grand, it would have more power, and one can say it will be larger, but also be freer, because the if the person has everything, then he also feels more free. He does not feel bound by that by those limitations. So the life of the spirit also involves automatically a much greater freedom, a liberation, a freedom from dependence upon the ordinary things of life, dependence upon things and people and so on for our well-being. So the person would be released into a larger and freer life of the spirit. It would not lose these former veils. It, again, the embodied being, would not lose these former veils. They would still be there because uh, these basic instruments are important. And the soul, the abstract entity or the non material entity, cannot accomplish things. So these tools are necessary. So these veils would not be lost, but they would no longer be veils or imperfect expressions. So, but these veils would not behave like veils anymore. They will let that deepest self, the spiritual being, influence our actions, influence the way our body, life, and mind work. So they would no longer be veils, but would be true manifestations, true expressions, true expressions of our deepest self, of the spiritual being. They would be changed into states of light, powers of spiritual life vehicles of a spiritual existence. So the whales would no longer act like whales, being illumined by that light which is emanating from a total view of the truth. The whales will no longer be whales. They can be called whales because that's how we have accustomed to calling them, but they will no longer behave like whales. Instead, they would become vehicles for a full manifestation, a true manifestation of our spiritual existence. But this again could not be if mind, life, and body were not taken up and transformed by a state of being and a force of being superior to them. Now, Sri Aurobindo emphasizes this a lot, that the surface instruments, the body, life, and mind, have to be taken up and transformed. Now, what does this taken up and transformed mean? Which means that they have to be incorporated in that change. And that requires not just the awareness of who we are and our deepest self and the deeper truths of existence, it goes beyond that. Because one can have more than a glimpse of these deeper truths of existence, and yet the human nature may not change because the way we behave depends more upon the body, mind, and the life force. And so long as these remain rooted still primarily in the physical, remain only partial manifestations of the deepest self, human nature may not change. And that's why uh, many who have had more than a glimpse of the deeper truths of existence continue to have the same type of egoistic tendencies, anger, greed, and so on. And the normal failings and weaknesses do not seem to have been much affected by that experience of the deeper truths of existence. So, for that to happen, which is very important in Sri Aurobindo's scheme of things, scheme of a spiritual life, is that these parts have also to be taken up. They also have to be taken along in this change. And that can come from not only that higher and deeper knowledge, but also becoming aware of it constantly and using that awareness to guide the type of life that we live, the type of choices that we make, the type of attitude we have towards our work, the type of attitude we have towards our fellow beings. So, all that should get influenced by this deeper knowledge, which should become a constant part or a less and less inconstant part of our awareness. But this again could not be if mind, life, and body were not taken up and transformed. Transformed because it is a major change and is a change for the better. That's what transformation is. Taken up and transformed by a state of being. Because normally the mind, life, and body are becomings. They are part of the phenomenal reality. But they should be transformed by something higher than that, which is being, a state of being, transformed by a state of being and a force of being superior to them. Because successful molding can come only from something that is superior to what is being molded, what is being transformed. So, mind, life, and body should be taken up and transformed by a state of being and a force of being superior to them. A power of supermind, that superior force has been called the supermind, and that is as much above our incomplete mental nature as that is above the nature of animal life. So, sort of, this gives us some sort of a view of that supermind, of which we may not have the direct experience, but still at least we can imagine and visualize how much that difference would be. So, this power of supermind is as much above, as much higher, as different from the incomplete mental nature. That is, mental nature that manifests only a small part of the spiritual being. So the supermind is as much above our incomplete mental being as something else is superior to something else. What is that something else? The mental nature. As mental nature is above the nature of animal life. So compare an animal to the ordinary mental nature of a human being, which is incomplete because of incomplete manifestation. So compare the animal life with that incomplete manifestation. Now, with that visual gap, something which we can easily visualize, we have experience of it. Now, extrapolate this knowledge to visualize the gap between the incomplete human nature, human mental nature as it is, and the supermind, which is yet to come and be experienced. So, supermind, as much a power of the supermind, as much above our incomplete mental nature as that as mental nature is above the nature of animal life. And another comparison follows. And animated matter, that is matter which is completely dormant. We call it dead matter. It's not really dead. It's inconscient. That is, it apparently can do nothing because it seems to know nothing. But it also has consciousness in a very dormant form, in a hidden form. That consciousness of the Supreme is there also in matter. Now, once that matter is animated by life, then we find how much difference it makes. So, animated matter is above the mere material nature. That is the type of nature that ordinary matter has. So, one comparison is how different animated matter, that is matter which has life, that is creatures which have life, how different they are from just matter. So, there is a gap that we can easily visualize, we can easily relate to. Another gap which we can easily relate to is the gap between animals and the human mental nature. Now, these two gaps give us some idea of how much the gap would be between the incomplete mental nature as it exists now and the creatures which will have a supermind or creatures which will have a supramental consciousness. Now, this passage is important because it gives us an idea of the type of process that will take us towards that new world, towards that new human race. It gives us an idea of the process and the type of gap, the type of journey that it involves. And basically, it remains fundamentally a twofold process. One is the change taking place in individuals, and secondly, the numbers in whom this change happens being much more than has been the case on Earth so far. That is, large numbers coming prepared to this Earth from the as a result of the homework that they did in previous lives or as a result of the evolutionary thrust, coming prepared to have a different type of growth and development, a different type of awareness that they develop during life, and their number crossing a certain critical mass, a certain threshold, so that instead of the present human nature, which we consider to be normal, instead of that running the affairs of the world are run by that transformed nature, by those who have that transformed nature, by a new type of a creation, a new race. We may call it human or superhuman, but that is the type of race that is the race that is going to dominate the affairs of the world in the future. And it is this radical change which will give us a world which will be free from sorrow, misery, and suffering, which we have so far been taking as a sort of a given, something which cannot change. But just because it has not changed for a long time doesn't mean it cannot change. As Sri Aurobindo says in Savitri, just because a flower is a bud doesn't mean that it will never become a flower. Just because we see an infant doesn't mean that the infant will not grow up. So, thank you.